Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Quitcast. This is the final episode in the sustainability series, and I have a couple of things that I want to say before we start. The first thing is, obviously, these are not the only four things that are included in any kind of sustainability journey, but I kind of tried to organize all of the sustainability actions into these four pillars. And so the final pillar, which we're going to talk about today, has some really big things in it, which brings me to the second thing that I want to say. I've given you a lot of action points to think about in the last three episodes, to the point where each one of these sort of felt like its own workshop on some level. And these four pillars in particular, the four pillars of sustainability, where manage your attention, manage your finances, manage your health, and then manage your self-worth, which is do the hard stuff, essentially, is the fourth pillar. And we'll talk about why I called it self-worth, because it's not self-worth the way we think of self-confidence as self-worth, but it's self-worth in knowing what you are actually worth to the world, understanding what your actual self-worth is, and then living as though that's true. So we'll talk about that in a second. But because I've given you a lot of action points in the last several episodes, there's a temptation towards overwhelm, right? Because there always is. Every time there's a lot of stuff to do, there's a temptation towards overwhelm. So I just want you to think about the fact that one of the things in every single pillar has been to just open the manuscript. Like every single time we have one of these episodes, I either have in the middle or at the end, okay, now we're going to go open the manuscript, because sustainably we have to open the manuscript consistently, even if we don't do it every day, even if it's not something, we don't write a certain number of words when we open it, whatever. But we cannot forget to attend to the manuscript as the first priority. And really, that is the number one pillar, right? On some level, is that's the thing that's underneath all of the pillars, is the opening of the manuscript. So if you've had too many action points and you just can't do anything about all of the other three things right now, opening the manuscript is the thing that I want you to keep in mind, and I want you to continue to do regardless of what other things you work on, because these things will come in time. You will figure them out. And I mean that. Some of us will absolutely have difficulties, and we will crash in our careers, and we will burn out and all of those things, but none of that is irrecoverable. Like you can recover from all of those things. And so I'm going to say a lot of this is just the reminder that as we move forward, we're going to acquire certain skills. They're going to happen. And my goal in these last three episodes was to give you kind of a blueprint for what those skills typically are. The last one, the list of things we have to talk about today, these are some really hard things. And I would consider these to be things that, and I'm going to say something a little contradictory to what I said before, where I said that you have to have these things if you're going to sustainably be in this career. But I will say there are some ways to get around having the stuff in pillar four, except for one, which is when I say do the hard stuff, the second point, which is do the work, is the only thing you can't get away from. And that is a self-worth thing, in terms of like when you do whatever work there is for you to do, that there is for you to do, that is, I know this is me. This is something I'm good at. This is something I'm capable of. I'm going to do this. I want this thing. I'm going to do it. That's the only thing we can't get around. But the other four, I mean, arguable. But I'm putting them in here because I really genuinely believe the people I've seen who have made it through longer careers in the most health, with the most security, with the most happiness, do these things. So it's not that you can't have a long-term career without it. It is that you probably don't want to. Like, it's possible. I don't recommend it. So let's jump in. So first of all, let me explain why I call this the self-worth pillar. When you understand what your worth is to the industry, to your family, to the people around you, to maybe yourself, even on some level, you act as though that is true. When you hold a diamond in your hand, you don't treat it like a glass. You're not setting it down and walking away from it and You know what I mean? Like you're treating it as though it has worth. And essentially that's what I mean by manage your self-worth is on some level, if we don't treat ourselves as though we have value to the world and we have value to our platform and to our readers and to our family, we are not going to be able to sustainably manage our career because we're going to make decisions that go against that value. We're going to leave the diamond on the counter and somebody's going to come by and take it. And then we're diamondless, right? So, like, in theory. But we need to be as conscious of acting as though we value ourselves as is humanly possible. So the first action point in the do the hard stuff is fix your backstory. And all of us who are writers understand that when you have a character that has certain wounds behind them, that has certain evidence of coding that's in their brain that has trained them to act, to be afraid of certain things, that has trained them to act, to not want to do certain things, they're going to act that way. Like their backstory is aligned to their story because in reality, your backstory is visible. The things that have happened to you, the things you believe about yourself, the ways in which you value or don't value yourself, all of that stuff is visible if people are paying attention. If you happen to be like a behavior specialist and you watch someone, you could see like, oh, this person has X, Y, and Z. It's why we all joke about things like if you ever watched Bones and you saw the guy who could pick the food that you should be eating, and everybody's like, that would never ever happen. It's a guess. It's all fiction. Oh no, there are tells about every single pattern, every single thing behind you that is consistent. Again, like all of the patterns that are hardwired enough that they're consistent. There's visibility in all of those things. And we are acting as though they are true because they are true. And the same thing happens with characters and stories. We have to fix their backstory, send them into the black moment, do the thing that they are scared to do. In like a romance novel, it's drop the mask, realize that you're worth loving, and take the chance to tell your best friend that you're really in love with them. That's the friends to lovers trope, right? Drop the mask of fear that if they don't love you back, there's something wrong. Like if they don't want you romantically back, that there's something wrong. You have to drop that mask. And then when you do, and you in a romance novel, and when you tell them this is how you feel, then you confront the fear and you can have this thing, right, that you wanted, which was this relationship. That fictional trajectory also mirrors real life in this that there are real patterns that are being created in your life that your fears are evidence of what the fix is. So when you're afraid of something, the fix for the fear is to confront that thing. It's not to give in to the fear. We talked about this recently on the Patreon. I used the example of tornadoes. Where I grew up, there were not tornadoes, generally speaking. So we didn't learn how to deal with them. And when I was in my first tornado outbreak with my best friend, I was freaked out by every single thing because I thought tornadoes came for you. I grew up watching Twister, so I was convinced tornadoes are out to get you. So every time there's a tornado on TV, I'm like, oh no, all those poor people. And for me, and again, I know tornadoes are serious, but also what I saw when I was with her, and there was a tornado outbreak. There were 7 tornadoes that touched down within like this small time period that we were in the middle of Fort Worth. We were in a hotel room and she was just sitting there being fine. Like, and I was like, there are tornadoes everywhere. And of course, in my brain, tornadoes are villains. And so in my brain, I'm thinking, we're not safe. There's so much danger everywhere. And what I realized as I watched her is like, oh no, there's a skill set here. Like there's a set of things that I can do to fix this fear. There are things I can learn. There are tools that I can have. There are patterns that I can understand that will help me know how to deal with this stuff. And then I'm going to be okay. And that's the thing that I saw her doing that I couldn't get to is I was so dysregulated by this tornado outbreak where In her mind, she looked at the radar. She knew where all the hooks were. She knew where we were on the map. She had all this experience with being in tornado outbreaks in the past, and she knew how they were going to behave. So she was not scared. Plus, she knew if there was any chance to get away from it, like if they're not going to come down right on top of you, if there's any chance to get away from it, someone warns you and then you go and do these things, right? So she had all these skill chains lined up to be able to handle being inside of this outbreak, which was terrifying to me. But I had this backstory of I didn't have any experience with them. I had this expectation that was incorrect about them. And then it made me feel as though I had to act in a certain way when those tornadoes were around. And I had this backstory in my head that was so hardwired in there that I could not break out of it in that moment. And it wasn't until I sat in that hotel room with her and I realized, oh, there's a different way to be. There is a way to acquire these skills. There are things that I could learn. And of course, what did I do? I did a deep dive and tried to understand everything. And then the next time that it happened, and of course, then I moved somewhere where tornadoes are more prevalent. And then I was in a tornado last April. Thank God that I had the experience where I could have learned all those things because it allowed me to stay regulated in that moment because I knew what was dangerous and what wasn't. In my head, tornado equals villain was my backstory. And now that I have all of these skills in understanding that that was not a true story, that I was telling myself something that was inaccurate. And all I needed to do was acquire these skills that would help me to be able to deconstruct that fear and then act in the face of what would be a real fear if it was there. And I would need to feel that fear if it was there. But if it isn't actually helpful, then we don't need to feel it. And I think so many of us are living in these spaces where we have this backstory that is creating all kinds of actions in our present. And I'm not saying this as a you better fix this thing. I'm saying this as a I'm in the middle of myself. I'm fixing my own backstory all the time. I do these parachute recordings where when I'm in a regulated state, I have all these different parachute recordings on my phone where I'll be like, okay, remind yourself of what you absolutely know is true and what you know in your logical brain you do not believe these emotions. But when you're in your emotional brain, you're believing those emotions. And so you want to go down this spiral when you actually do know logically that this is true. So let's listen to you talking to yourself as a regulated person, and I would regulate myself. So and there's a post on the Patreon about this. It's called Anatomy of a Parachute. If you want to read it, I think it's really worthwhile reading because it gives you some step-by-step stuff of how to create these. But in terms of fixing your backstory from a sustainability place, when we are constantly acting out of fear and we don't know it, we are getting results that we don't like. We are constantly repeating patterns that we don't want to repeat, and we don't understand why we're repeating them. And so much of this, so much of the fix your backstory point, the action point for me is just about the awareness that you're not always in control of your thoughts, that you don't always need to listen to everything that's going on up here because sometimes these thoughts that you're having when you're dysregulated, when you're emotionally below the line, are not helpful. They were helpful at a time and place in the past, they're not helpful anymore. And so, what I need you to do, because this is going to be hard work, is to do the work to fix those equal signs that have blank equals villain on that is like tornadoes equal villain. Yeah, are tornadoes dangerous? In the situations where you are in danger in a tornado, yes, you are in danger. But generally speaking, if you understand how to handle them and how to take action around them and how to be safe around them, you can be safe in an outbreak if you will do things the correct way. And again, these are skill sets and skill chains that we can have access to. If you don't know that, if you don't know that attention from other people is not a villain. If you don't know that and you believe that attention is a villain, you're always going to act as though being on social media, being seen, publishing, talking about your book, all of those things are dangerous to you because you have attention equals villain in your head. And every time attention happens, the equals villain starts a program running that has been around since the dawn of time. And it's something that's trying to keep you safe, it's trying to protect you, but you're not in danger. The only danger you are in is if this happens and you don't have this skill set, then there's danger. So, what I want to encourage us to do in the Fix Your Backstory action point is go after those equal signs where you have something that is not helping you and you need to acquire some skills to help yourself get out of that space. I usually recommend that people at least check out Enneagram work, and I have two book recommendations for you. If you have not yet read Claire Taylor's Reclaim Your Author Career and you're a writer, I think that's the best place to start. I also really love The Complete Enneagram by Beatrice Chestnut, and I'm looking at it because I have it over here on my desk. Almost showed it to you, but I'm like, I don't know the legalities of other people's books and stuff like that. So, but the Complete Enneagram, Beatrice Chestnut has some action point paths for development. And for me, when I'm doing Enneagram development, I always want to start with where my fear is keeping me in a cycle that I don't want to continue to produce those results. So, Fix Your Backstory becomes look for those equal signs, right? And again, there's the Anatomy of a Parachute thing on the Patreon if you want to look at it. Number two, we cannot sustainably be in long-term successful careers as authors if we do not do the hard work. And by that, I mean, there are going to be things you absolutely don't want to do. You do not like them. They're not comfortable for you, but you're going to have to do them. And on some level, if we don't get to a place where we accept that that is the case, that there are things that we have to do that we don't want to do and don't like, and that we get to the point where we are willing to do those things and do them without making ourselves feel bad about it, without getting completely below the line emotionally about it. Like if we can get to the point where we can make ourselves do the hard work, and sometimes, by the way, because some of you who are like, I love hard work is my jam. I'm like, yeah, how about feel your feelings, Kevin? Don't like that so much, do ya? So if you are a, I love hard work and hard work is amazing for me and I can do hard work all day long, but ask me to feel my feelings and all of a sudden I'm like, never mind, that work sucks. We're not going to do that. Then that's what your hard work is. That's what your hard stuff is, right? Because we can't stay sustainably sane and happy if we do not do the hard work on whatever it is that we need challenge in, right? If we don't take those challenges and conquer those smaller fears, this is not the bigger fears like the last action point. These are smaller fears, right? But doing the work for some of us might mean I really don't want to run ads. And that's reasonable. Some of us are not great ad runners and we might want to pay people to run ads for us, but also if we want to sell and we're not selling and we've done everything else we can to sell and the only thing left to do is to run ads, there are ways to learn how to do ads that don't require just leaving yourself out in the tundra and not having any support. Like you could come and see Crystal, who is our marketing manager at the BFA, and you can get coaching one-on-one and how to run ads. There are ads classes and books out there clearly. And I think some of you who resist this advice, who resist the like, let's do the hard stuff, like learn how to run ads, you've tried to do the courses and they're not working for you. And I would say try coaching then and see if that will help, because sometimes there's a gap in your skill chain that you just haven't gotten to the place yet where you found the right skill to hold in that gap so that it will keep you headed in the right direction. And you probably need somebody who really understands those skill chains to be able to help you figure out how to do that. So that might be a place you want to go. You may want to go to her free live Q&A, marketing Q&A that she does every month, which I'll put the link in the show notes for that. You may want to do a micro coaching small group with her. so you can hear her talk about marketing and ads to other people. You might want to get coaching one-on-one. But a lot of these do the hard work things are things that we have tried to do in the past, and we've not been successful in doing them on our own. And I just need us to remember, for most of us, asking for help is hard work. Asking for help is something we do not do effectively and well. And that may be the do the hard work, Kevin, is ask for help, Kevin, right? And I think I said last, I pick on Kevin a lot. I actually have a cousin named Kevin. He's amazing, but somehow that's the name that comes out when I get frustrated. So George too. George comes out a lot too. That one makes sense though. If you do my backstory, that one would make sense. Okay. So do the work is the second action point. And that means, again, whatever the actual hard work is for you to do, the work that you keep avoiding doing, that's the hard work to do. And you don't have to do it today. It doesn't have to be right now. You don't have to jump out into therapy right now and feel 1,000 feelings and whatever. But at some point, that's the work that's in front of you. That's the next step. You're going to have to do that. And some of you are not having successful careers, successful relationships, successful businesses because you are not willing to confront this particular thing. You are not willing to confront your responsibility in something. You're not willing to confront the difficulty that you're having in your relationships. You're not willing to confront the fact that you keep getting these results over and over and over again, and you don't want them, but you're not willing to change anything. So at some point, if you want bad enough the thing that's on the other side of that hole, you're going to do the thing. You're going to figure out how to do the thing. And if that means you have to feel feelings in order to get there, you have to deal with past hurts and heal old wounds and change patterns and have some self-realizations, then that means that's what you have to do. Some of you, your hard work is stop learning and write the books and do the work. For some of us, the hard work is say no to classes for a year. For some of us, the hard work is take a sabbatical. For some of us, the hard work is, whew, that one made me emotional, in a good way. Someday, Becca, someday we'll get one, someday. But everybody's hard work, the thing that we resist is a little different. And we are going to have to do the hard work if we want to get where we want to go. When I recorded this episode the first time, I started at the very beginning by saying, I'm going to say something in this episode every single person is going to be mad at me for. Like, and not just the kind of mad, like, oh, Becca, that sort of damn it, Becca thing that we do, but like the legitimately, like, where they want to swear at me and be like, and we're not doing that. That is absolute zero, no. And that feeling, I just want us to say, is an important feeling to understand because often that level of just like absolutely not is a signal that there's a real big fear hiding under there that we need to deal with, that we need to, again, heal over, but we need to deal with that thing, right? So this is one that I think a majority of us are going to have that kind of feeling with. And here's what it is. You have to accept what you can't change so that, and this is important, I think when people talk about acceptance, they're always talking about acceptance as like an ascendant place, which I do think there's some level of like, yes, when you practice acceptance, there's a lot of ascendance that happens. But the reason I think we need to connect acceptance to something else is that a lot of us feel like what we actually want is to be able to change the thing we can change. That's the thing we want. But we keep not accepting what we can't change because we keep looking for the thing we can. So we're like, no, this is coming and I don't want this to happen. And so I'm just not going to accept that. And I'm going to look for every single way around it. But then when you reach the end of your ability to find the ways around it, acceptance starts to become the only option because once you accept that there is a thing that's unchangeable that is going to happen, and then you say, okay, if that happens, then I'm going to deal with it in this way, or you allow yourself to find the thing that you can actually do in the face of that thing. Right. So if the worst possible thing that you can imagine happens, and then there's something you can do in the face of that thing. And the example that I use a lot in terms of like accepting what we can't change and finding the thing that we can change is the Cold War, right? So when we were in the some of you are probably alive at this time. The only thing I really remember are the school drills, right? I remember having to get under my desk and doing school drills. And again, we didn't have tornadoes. That's the only thing we would have been doing school drills, getting under the desk for, right? But I remember doing the school drills and I kept thinking like, okay, this is the thing that we can do. Like we can prepare for that kind of eventuality, yes. And also, there's a need for us, for not every single person is this way, but many of us need to find the thing that we can change in that situation. So I think what a lot of people did was they did something like shelters, right? They had nuclear fallout shelters that they would build. And there's this big kind of uh, architectural thing, right? About the homes that you could buy that had a fallout shelter. It was kind of a big deal for a while of like novelty or whatever. But that was the thing that you could do, the thing that you knew would help you if this thing you can't change happens. And that building of the fallout shelter is almost that acceptance of like, okay, there's a possibility something's going to happen I'm really not happy with. And so I'm going to do this thing. And for a lot of us, this was why I made the finances video, was because a lot of us are not prepared for what happens if the thing that we don't want coming comes for us. We don't want our sales to go down. We don't want the market to get saturated. We don't want there to be too much competition. We don't want there to be 1,000 more people selling books in our genre every day. We don't want any of that to happen, but we can't control any of that. We can't change any of that. So if I don't accept the fact that there are things in the industry that happen that I have no control over, I will not be able to find the stuff that I can do about whatever the truth is in what remains. There's always a way to build a fallout shelter, is basically what this particular action point is about. And I want us to get to the acceptance of the crappy stuff that happens. It's so funny because I was going to give an example of this, but every single thing that I would say is an example of like, oh, this is a little thing. I'm like, oh, but there are some people for whom that's a really big deal, right? Like, so I can't even give an example of some little tiny thing, but I don't just mean things that are normally difficult for us. I mean things that are hugely difficult. Some of us are so dysregulated about things like the presence of AI in the industry that we can't even use the word. We can't even talk about it in public places because some of us get so dysregulated thinking about it that we are just not willing to even consider the acceptance that there may be something we can't control or change about this industry. There may be bad things that happen and we can't control. And what I am not saying is that we should just let it wash over us and not have any, you can feel however you want to feel. I'm not telling you how to feel. What I am saying is that the acceptance of what happens is the precursor to being able to figure out how to deal with whatever it is. So if I will accept that there are things that I can't control and I will accept there are things that I can't change, then I can figure out how to, and I don't mean game the system like somehow I want to cheat, but I mean game the system in a way that helps me to continue to have some agency, helps me to continue to feel like I can get some sense of what I want. And the bottom line is that we had this really great conversation in the WBF Facebook group, which we have these post-class Facebook groups that are private, so you can't find it. But I just want to relay this conversation we had, like some people who were legitimately frightened about what might be coming for them in their segment of the industry and how painful it is for them to think about the fact that they don't have any control over these big, big picture things that are happening that may affect their ability to feed themselves, right? Like it is extreme fear on their part. And it was so cool. It was just so cool to watch the community come around them and be like, here's my sympathy because this thing that you're feeling is really big and we want to validate how sucky this is and how hard this is for you. We want to validate that. And also, I've been through, they didn't say these words, but this is essentially what I saw. I've been through the acceptance part of this, and here's what I'm doing. Here's what and you could hear the difference in the regulated tone, right? Those of us who feel this fear and we're getting dysregulated by the fear, and then somebody comes along who has a regulated tone, and you're like, oh, I hear the difference between those two. I hear the person who feels in their security and they've made some plans and they've figured out what they can do. Like that's the fallout shelter thing, right? So we want to have this idea of if I can get to a place where I feel all of that fear and all of that frustration, I let myself feel whatever I have to feel. Again, do the negative emotion cycle, but I feel whatever I have to feel. And then I get to a point where I can be back in my logic thinking brain again because I've now been able to connect with my community or connect with my own security or make a plan or whatever it is that I'm doing to make sure that I can do what I'm capable of doing. So the things I can't change, the only reason we accept them is to identify and say, I can't do anything about that. Here's what I can do something about though, because and this leads into the next point. There needs to be more and more and more and more regulated people in the spaces. And by regulated, here's what I mean. There is a range of emotional capacity in relationship to action. And this comes from the Laurel Mellon Wired for Joy book. It really comes from the pathway concept. She did this thing called emotional brain training. And those of you who've listened to the Quitcast a lot have heard me talk about that a lot in the past. But essentially, there's a 1 to 5 scale. And one is like pure joy, elation. And then you have a two, and then the three is where the line is, right? So when we say below the line and above the line, that's what the three is. Four is on your way to being completely dysregulated. And then five is like completely dysregulated. You're in a spiral at that point, right? So, what we can't do is expect that we're not going to have any negative emotions when we're above the line because you want to still have some negative emotions up there. You can feel some fear and still be logical. You can feel some anger, some sadness, some guilt and still be logical. It's when we start to get into the place where those emotions become in charge of us that it becomes more painful. And that's when we start to get dysregulated. And that's when we stop making the logical choices, when we get down below the line and we make choices that are not as logical. And some of them are actually void of logic completely, but they sound real logical below the line because when we are emotional, everything emotional sounds logical to us. So all I want us to do, this is number 4 action point. Number 4, our only goal is to not make any decisions when we are below the line emotionally. When we are feeling so many negative emotions that it's hard for us to connect to anything positive. Because again, you can still feel all of the negative emotions above the line. You're still capable of feeling fear when you're also feeling happiness if you're above the line. When you're not capable of that is when you're dysregulated, when you're below the line. So it is so important in this 4th action point to stay as regulated as possible because we can dysregulate everyone at once by saying whatever it is, whatever the thing is that we're all afraid of having happen. We can say that and then everybody gets dysregulated. But what we can't do is make decisions below the line. I need us to get regulated as often as possible and stay regulated. And the reason I continue to repeat that you can feel negative emotions above the line is that when you're below the line, you keep telling yourself you can't afford to feel any positive emotions. You can't afford to feel that because if you feel the positive emotions, you lose touch with your negative emotions. You lose touch with your anger, with your fear, your sadness, and your guilt. That's not true, though. That is not true. If you are in your logical brain, you can feel all 4 positive emotions, primary positive emotions, sort of like primary colors, and all 4 negative emotions. You can feel both of them above the line. It's not like all the positive emotions are up here and all the negative emotions are down here. That's dysregulation talking. So I just want us to stay regulated as often as possible and to try to feel when we're starting to go below the line so that we can get regulated again and then make decisions that take into account both of those sets of emotions. Because every emotion is an action point. Every single emotion is an action point. This is why, by the way, those of you who think emotions are not real data, emotions are real data because they cause real action points in our real behavior. And they cause action points that can be both logical and true and good, all of those things at the same time, in addition to the possibility that they also can cause actions to happen that are not true. But that does not mean that all emotional decisions are illogical, because you can still make emotional decisions above the line. It's when you're only feeling emotional that your decisions become illogical. So we want to get regulated as much as possible. And I'm going to send you to Sarah Baldwin or Thais Gibson, and I'll put those links in the show notes so that you can see them to learn more about regulation. I also think it's important to read the Laurel Mellon book at some point, just because there are some things she says in her theories about joy that I just haven't seen hold true over the course of my clinical work. But I'm going to give her complete credit for that, because she has done some of the seminal research in this area. And I just think she did an amazing, amazing job with this EBT program. It's the reason I'm a functional adult at this point. Basically, I went through that program in my 20s. It absolutely saved my life. So, anyway, I need us to stay regulated though, because regardless of who you are and regardless of what you believe or think, everything is unstable. Everything is uncertain. And that means we all start to get dysregulated. And this is part of why every time I would bring up, for instance, the topic of AI in a discussion, like if we were doing one of our development videos on the Patreon, or if we were having one of our topical calls on the Patreon or something, I would always steer clear of AI as a discussion topic, because it immediately has the power to dysregulate about half of the people. And when you're in a group, if that many people get dysregulated, the whole group struggles to stay regulated. And the people who are very secure and are staying regulated will just leave, because the conversation becomes so dysregulated that they can't even handle it. And so, as you're starting to feel those big, big feelings, I need you to take a pause and remember the action point to stay regulated, because you don't want to be making decisions. You for sure don't want to be doing social media posts. You for sure don't want to be getting into discussions with people that you really care about when you're below the line, because you're not doing anything that is beneficial and helpful at that point, except letting yourself come back out of it. And again, this is the reason that below the line is helpful. There are still tools down there. This is why I reference the Laurel Mellon work, because she has this really great equivalency of all the different tools for the different states, which I think, again, they help me. I still use them to this day. But there are things you can do to help yourself. There are action points that can still be created down in that space, but it's not a helpful decision making, like especially long-term decision making capacity. And the best thing, especially those of you who are dominant in relationship building strengths, especially those of you who have the capacity to do what I'm about to describe, but need to be able to do this more, is that we need to try to stay regulated together also. That in community, we need to do everything we can to try to remind all of us, like, we can take action if we know what we're facing. We can take action. We still have agency. We still have capacity. There's still things we can do. Like, we need to get to a place where we feel that. We feel that security. We feel like there's something we can do, because that regulation can only happen either inside of ourselves. Some of us can self-regulate, and many of you can probably self-regulate. And some of you self-regulate easily about some things, not about others. But we have to be willing to co-regulate with each other as well, because there are certain things that you can only believe if you hear other people say them. And it's one of the reasons why I made the parachute post on the Patreon, is because I want us to be able to have some tools. So like when I'm doing coaching now, sometimes I'll say, okay, I'm going to make you a quick parachute recording, and then I'm going to email it to you so that you will have it, because I want you to listen to this when you start to get dysregulated and remind yourself, we've got to get above the line though before we start making decisions about this stuff. Because when I make decisions below the line, I'm not making decisions in my best self, and I want to make sure that I'm above the line in those cases. So again, Laurel Mellon's work, phenomenal. But I don't want to stay here because I think we've talked enough on the Patreon and in the Quitcast about fear. I want to move on to this last action point, which I think might be the one that is the most important for writers specifically. I think the last one is the most important for us as human beings in the world. But the fifth one I think is the most important for writers in particular, which is trust your voice. So often, when we hear other people telling us things, like we hear someone say, well, if you want this, you should do this. Like everybody's doing this thing, so you should do this. Or, oh my gosh, you better be afraid of this thing because what if this happens? And oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, right? Like we get into these spaces where we're not trusting ourselves because we're listening to other people's certainty. And again, remember the certainty correctness scale, right? When someone else is completely certain about something, we want to believe biologically that they're completely correct about it as well. But that is not always the case. You can be 100% certain and absolutely incorrect, or you can be completely uncertain and absolutely correct because certainty and correctness are on an XY axis from each other. They are not relevant in that way, in the way that if one goes up, the other one goes up. But biologically, we want that to be true. Biologically, if someone is certain, we want to believe they're correct because that's the easiest for us. And then if we are uncertain about something, we want to believe that we're incorrect. So we listen to other people and we let them convince us of things that may or may not be in our best interest and may or may not be something we actually want or think or feel at all. But we go there because their certainty is so significant. And this happens again, mass dysregulation always happens. Again, dysregulation happens easily in mass, ENMASSE, right? Like en masse. Um, and it's important to remember that if you are feeling dysregulated, to get re-regulated, absolutely. But then additionally, we want to make sure to trust our voice, trust our intuition. Listen when your gut is telling you something. And then additionally, and this is sort of the QTP, other people's expectations, et cetera, there's going to be so much difference between how every single person's career functions and acts, how they get better as a writer, how they attract readers to themselves. Everything is so different. We have got to be willing to do the work to understand ourselves and to know where we need to push ourselves and where we don't. Like, where is it important that I push myself? And sometimes that only happens in hindsight because I have taken chances and I've tried to do something that didn't work for me. And I realized that's definitely not for me. It's okay if we're learning some of this in hindsight, but we have to be willing to take the chances and take the risks and do the things to figure this out and embracing the learning curve. And this trust your voice action is understanding who you are and trusting your gut and your intuition and doing the things that you know are for you. So that might mean that you have to do some fix your backstory work about old tapes that people are talking to you still in your head and telling you not to listen to yourself and not to trust yourself. You might have some trauma responses going on that you need to go to therapy in, right? But some of us need to learn how to trust our intuition in such a massive way because there's something we know is true about ourselves that we are just not listening to. So our intuition might be telling us something like, hey, don't write to market because you're not going to be happy doing it. And then we do it and we do it and we do it and we do it and we're still not happy. We may even do it and make money and we're still not happy. And we knew that when we started, right? Because we had that intuition. So learning how to trust your voice and trust your intuition is going to be an important thing. And then I'm just going to add a sixth action point here because I think this is part of doing the hard stuff. We have got to be in community. We have to. The way that the future is going and the way that the digital world especially is going to reshape itself between online and everything that's happening in the world, everything that's happening inside and outside of us in particular as people, there's going to be some reshaping that happens. And the world may or may not look how we expect it to look. And we need to have some kind, and the digital world may or may not look the way we expect it to look. And I mean that for everyone. I don't think anyone is forecasting everything correctly. So we have got to be connected to other people. We have to be connected to writers some way in person or locally or in an analog way or whatever it is. We're going to start doing some in-person events as well. We've already done in-person events for years, but we're going to start trying to do more of them throughout the year just to try to help some of the BFA people that are around get together with each other, meet each other, encourage local community, encourage writers to be more consistently forming in-person relationships with each other. Because I also think that's going to be really important to sustainability, not just in a way of like find the people who are going to be in this industry with you, but more just to have some kind of in-person connection to other people that's going to help us stay grounded in this industry and stay connected. So that's the last action point. Okay, one last reminder about all of the things. Obviously, I said a lot of things in these videos. I gave a lot of action points. I gave a lot of advice. I just want to remind everyone we can't do it all. So we need to winnow down what we feel is the most important. And again, I'm going to remind everybody for the last time to open the manuscript because I think that's important. I still need to do my fiction words today. I'm looking at my little star calendar that tells me that I haven't put a blue star yet on the day. So I got to do my own fiction words. So I'm going to do that as soon as we're done recording. And I want you to do that as well to open your manuscript and get into the words, right? So if you've made it this far, congratulations. Open your manuscript. That is the key underneath all of the pillars to a long-term sustainable career is to continue to open the manuscript and get words done. No matter what happens, continue to get words done. All right. Thanks everybody for coming to this talk, for listening to all of my yammering for the last 4 episodes. We are going to start a new mini series here, and we're actually going to keep kind of going back and forth between a couple of different series for a while because I want to do some more of the character ones, but then we have this coaching session series that we're going to do. I'm very excited about. The first one is about a super controversial topic, and so I'm very excited. No, I'm not excited at all. I still cannot record the rest of that episode, but we'll get there. We'll get there. I'll talk to my people, and they'll help to ground me, and then we'll get there. But I'm very excited about these episodes, so I hope you'll tune in next time to listen to that one. And please, please go right now. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for being on the Quitcast with me. Bye, everyone.